This program is brought to you in part by SalCal Real Estate Connections.
Well, George, we're off to our next adventure in history with these cars, and I think you know a little bit about this 1931 Chrysler, which I have to tell you is gorgeous. What could you tell me, George, about this car?
Okay, this is a 1931 Chrysler CL Custom Imperial by LeBaron. It's got a dual cowl Phaeton body, one of about 60 that were produced in 1931.
Wow, that's a very low number.
Right, it's a 146-inch wheelbase. Um, it was the beginning of the Depression, and these were more expensive than your average car at that time.
What kind of money are we talking?
Well, a dual cowl Phaeton listed for about $3,600, which seems reasonable compared to a Duesenberg that was at the time, which was way over $10,000, and a Cadillac V16, which was between $6,000 and $7,000.
Would you consider this car to be a performance car in that time frame?
Well, it does have the red head straight eight 9 main bearing engine, and this engine raced at Indianapolis. They had Chrysler brought a car there, the same engine that we have in this car, just had a little bit more tweaking and 4 carburetors, but basically the same engine. And this is a 4-speed transmission too in 1931.
Wow, I mean this car is beautiful. Dual cowl. Wow, I mean, so they competed with like Packards.
Well, if you saw a 1930 Chrysler, the design of it had a flat radiator, was really nothing that out of the ordinary compared to any other car. As a matter of fact, most Chrysler products all look the same. Well, Walter P. Chrysler saw a car that came out in 1929. It was called the L29 Cord, and he loved the design. It was very low, long sweeping fenders, a V radiator. So he pretty much had his designers copy the look of the Cord L29 on the front of this. And then he hired LeBaron, who was a custom coach builder at the time, to build special bodies on this CL, the long wheelbase chassis.
Now, was that a common practice back in the day to hire LeBaron to do this kind of thing?
Well, there was lots of different coach builders. There was many right here in New England. There was Waterhouse was in Massachusetts, Judkins, and many other coach builders. Ralston was in New York City. So you were able to, as a customer, if you had enough money, order a custom body on the Chrysler Custom Imperial chassis. Now they made a number, LeBaron was hired by Chrysler to make a number of the same cars, but only under special order for those two.
I mean, they didn't put one of these cars together too quick. I imagine it took a little time too, huh?
Probably, I'm going to say 1 out of every 50 Chryslers on the assembly line was the Custom Imperial.
Now, color-wise, is this car pretty close to where it was when it was new?
Yes, this was a common color combination, maroon with black fenders and red wheels. But this actually has most of all the accessories that you could get at the time. It has Pilot Ray driving lamps that turn with the wheels, dual trumpet horns, the accessory grill guard, the gazelle ornament, and then also the wheels, which have stainless steel spoke wheels.
Wow, this thing is really special. I had no idea. I mean, this car everywhere I look on, there's something different.
Well, they were built to compete. Walter P. wanted to compete with Cadillac and Pierce Arrow and Packard at the time. So before that, as I mentioned, they were generic. Chrysler did make an earlier Imperial, but it was just a larger version of just a regular Model 66 or 77. This was a very special car. They only built them in 1931, 32, and 33. And then Walter P. Chrysler decided that they weren't selling enough cars, so he put all his interest and put all his chips on the Chrysler Airflow in 1934.
Yeah, that was very, very different. But I have to say, I mean, we are. We're recovering from the Depression. I mean, to buy a car like this, boy, it was not your normal situation.
Well, that's correct. But this, this is a real jewel of the classic car era. The early 30s really was when they built cars to really stand out, and these were, very special cars at the time. As I mentioned, everyone was a special order. They made about 60 dual cowl Phaetons, but I've also just sold a convertible coupe in 1931, which only 10 were built.
Wow. Now, did you restore this car, George?
No, this was restored about 20 years ago. We were lucky enough to purchase a collection from a fellow in New Hampshire who spent 40 years collecting one of every body style of the custom Imperials from 1931 to 33. So we have two left here on display, and this is one of my favorites, a dual cowl Phaeton.
Yeah, I've seen this car. Believe you had it up at Kleinberg, if I'm not mistaken. And I'll tell you, it is gorgeous. I have to say, I love the colors. I mean, it's just beautiful.
It is, and it runs and drives. By the 1930s, cars were easily going 60 and 70 miles an hour, straight eight engine cars. Model A Fords and some of the smaller cars were lucky to do 50, but these cars were built to cruise, and the four-speed transmission really makes it a pleasure to drive.
Now, having some of the things this car has, like the headlights moving when you turn, I mean, he was really watching his Cord company close, wasn't he?
Well, he did because, he just liked the styling, and these are just dealer accessories, the Pilot Ray driving lights and the horns. But most of the people that ordered these cars were well off, and they wanted the cars to look as as glitzy as possible at the time, with as many accessories as you could find at the time.
Now, tell me, son, any cars to this nature would ever got involved with the Vanderbilt Cup?
No, it was a little bit beyond the Vanderbilt Cup. The last Vanderbilt Cup race really was, the official one was around 1914. But Indianapolis 500 was the race as it is now, pretty much. And Chrysler decided to enter a race car in 1931. Actually had the same grille, same engine, but it was a two-passenger race car, two-man.
Wow. I'm going to have to look up that car and see what that car looks like, because you really got my attention when you said when they raced this car to Indianapolis. Wow, that is special.
Yes, yeah. Well, Chrysler, again, this was radios had been invented, and that was a way people got their news. But they still, if you won a race or you were involved in racing, you were still able to get your name in the paper. And if you won a race, it was front page of news.
Now, the motor in this car, you mentioned, was it red head or something?
Yes, right. It's a redhead straight eight, 9-main bearing. And it's a straight eight, very, very high performance for the time. It's about 170 horsepower.
Wow. For back then, that was something, right?
Yes, right. Oh, yes, of course.
And when you think about, they were competing against cars on the street that were supercharged and everything else.
Right, yes, right. Auburn came out a little bit later with a supercharged car. There was a few specialty supercharged cars at the time, but this was long and low and fast, and that's what people wanted to purchase at that time.
I have to say, their designers were really good, because the car really, when you look at it, it's just beautiful. Classic.
Right, absolutely. Well, the V radiator, the split windshield, the low profile. This car is actually 5 inches lower than pretty much any other car, a Packard or anything of that time.
That tells you something. They were really they were kind of ahead of their time back then.
Right. Well, the designers, they had to come up to for sales to get people. They had a lot of competition, especially in the more exotic or more exclusive car line. So they had a lot of competition and not a lot of customers. So they had to offer something that was different, and people wanted to be seen in this car at the time. So you had Duesenberg styling for 1/4 the price.
Yeah, I could tell the young guns, I like to call them, must have had their fun their day with these cars.
Right, right. And I'm sure they got a lot of speeding tickets.
Absolutely. Speaking of speeding, we're gonna take a look at the motor of this car, and I have a feeling that this thing has an interesting engine. Am I right about that?
Yes, yeah, it does have the performance engine that they offered that year.
All right, very good. Let's take a look at it. The motor in this Chrysler is just unbelievable. This car is just absolutely gorgeous. I had no clue they made cars like this, the Chrysler Corporation. Just beautiful. Okay, George, we're on to our next adventure today with the history of the automobile. And we're in front of a beautiful car here. This Packard 1931 dual cowl Phaeton, which back then, I'll tell you, when you had money, you owned one of these cars. Am I thinking right?
Yes, absolutely, right. The dual cowl Phaeton was the most desirable at that time, and it still is to collectors today.
Now, I have to ask you, Packard itself, I mean, back in the day, it was like they were it. I mean, when it came to buying a real quality car, they were right on top of the list, right?
Oh, absolutely. They always had a luxury market that they went after, and that's why Cadillac and Marmon and Pierce Arrow, all the big companies, looked to Packard. That was their competition. Now we saw the 31 Chrysler Imperial, which was also a car that was part of their competition at the time. It was actually developed just to go after Packard customers.
I could believe it because, I mean, when you go back to history, these cars, I mean, they were sought after too.
Right. Well, closed cars, people were very conservative during the Depression, but if you wanted something sporty, you either bought a rumble seat Roadster or the dual cowl Phaeton. Now, this car, we're going to compare it just a little bit to the Chrysler Imperial that we saw earlier. This is a dual cowl Phaeton, but it's made on the Standard 8 chassis, which was 133-inch wheelbase. The Chrysler was 146-inch wheelbase. So not many of the dual cowl Phaeton bodies were put on a Standard 8 chassis in 1931.
Now, would you know the area this car was built in?
Well, it was built in Detroit and it was sold new in Providence, Rhode Island, and it was actually a leftover 31 car. And it has a dealer installed 32 grill and bumpers to make it look like a 32. It was about a $25 or $30 option at the time to make the car look a little newer, but most dealers did it because they had leftover 31s that they didn't sell. Now, this car actually went to the chief of police of Providence, Rhode Island. This was his personal car, and he bought it in early 1932.
Wow, I can't believe that. That's hard to believe, you know. I mean, they're beautiful, the cars. I love them. They just have that mystique about them.
Right, right, and this is really considered a sport Phaeton. Has a fold-down windshield. It's got dual spotlights. This is probably exactly how the car was offered at the time, and with a few dealer accessories. But they tried to make it as sporty as possible. For a police chief to come in and buy it as his personal car maybe was a little unusual at that time. But if you've seen some of the Elliot Ness TV shows, you saw that most of the cars they used were big open touring cars when they went after criminals, because there was lots of guys could fit in it, lots of police could fit in the car, and also was easier to if they had to use their guns to shoot after someone in an open car.
Yeah, just like the mafia, right? And Providence, Rhode Island, I'm sure had a few of them.
Well, I wouldn't know about that, Larry, but but this belonged to the police chief, and he owned it for about 30 years, and it was sold to the police chief in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and we bought it from his son, and he owned it for almost 60 years.
Now, tell me, this had the motor in this car was a straight eight. Was it a big motor?
Well, they had different size engines. On the Standard 8 engine was a little bit smaller. They also made a Super 8, which was the largest engine, which was equal to the size of the Chrysler. And then in 1932, they made a huge leap and came out with what they called a Twin Six, which was a V12 Packard in 1932. So even though it was in the depths of the Depression, Cadillac V16s were selling. Cadillac also made a V12, so Packard thought that they should also come out with a V12, which was a very expensive car. It's actually the opposite of what you would think what would be happening in the Depression, during the Depression, but that caught up with Packard a little bit later. But in 1931, this was still a very good selling car, the Standard 8 and Super 8 Packards. And in 32, the V12 really sold. They sold as many as they could build.
Tell me, the V12, as far as history goes, was it a reliable engine?
Yes, it was really for smoothness, like the V16 Cadillac, V16 Marmon engine. The more cylinders, the smoother the engine than the car. But now it wasn't the first time that Packard had a V12. In 1915, they came out with a Twin Six at that time also, which was a V12 that they built up until 1922, and 23 is when the straight 8 Packard engine was introduced.
I'll tell you, when you look back at history, a company like this Packard here, how they didn't survive is really a strange thing, isn't it?
Well, in the 50s, it was really poor management. They sold out to Studebaker. Well, there was a merger with Studebaker and Packard, and they didn't keep up with styling, even though Packards were very elegant cars and they made wonderful, high-quality cars. They just didn't keep up with the styling as lots of other companies did in the 50s.
Yeah, the history there. I mean, when you look back, you're saying to yourself, geez, how could they go away? It's hard to believe.
Yes, well, they weren't the only ones that, even in the 50s, a lot of car companies, Hudson and Nash, also were those companies went out of business.
When I think back, when I look at history, the history right in our very state here, Connecticut, how many cars, some of them didn't go in production, but how many cars were literally, designed and built here?
Right, exactly. And the Locomobile in Bridgeport, Pope Hartford in Hartford, the Corbin in New Britain. There's many, many other. There was dozens of car companies right here in Connecticut. But because they didn't have the funding or the factory production abilities, they did not survive. Locomobile was in business for 30 years. They were the longest, from 1899 to 1929.
They have a real good history in racing, too. Am I thinking right?
Right. They were the first American car to win the Vanderbilt Cup in 1908.
Yeah, I'll tell you, we're going to have to dab into this Connecticut created car history because, boy, it's special.
It is, absolutely. The automotive history in general is very interesting. The people that were involved, and cars were a big part of everyone's life, just like today. You could not survive today without cars.
It's strange. I remember growing up as a young kid, I couldn't wait every year to see what the new car looked like,
Right. Well, that's that was the big thing. And even today with the New York Auto Show and all the auto shows, the new car shows around the country, people still get excited to see the new models.
Absolutely. It's part of our history, and Europe is really no different.
Right, exactly. Right. Well, Packard started in 1899. A lot of people didn't know that the Packard Motor Car Company began in 1899. And by 1904, they built a four-cylinder car. The first cars were one cylinders, and then they built four-cylinder cars later on, and then went after the luxury car market starting in 1905 and all the way up until the 50s.
Now, did they really start in the Detroit area?
No, they were first built in Warren, Ohio, where the Packard Company, and then moved to Detroit a few years later.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see where these companies, got their start and where they, I never knew they started in Ohio. That's really different.
Yes, right. I know. It's people don't think of it. And actually, the Packard Company is still there, the Packard Cable Company. That's what they still make wiring and cables, and the company still exists.
Yeah, I remember growing up when you had a Packer wire in your spark plug, you had something special.
That's right. They were the highest quality you could buy. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember that. You know, you bought. That's what you bought when you had a performance car. You wanted that wire.
That's right. Yes.
Well, George, this has been an interesting day, and as usual, you're right on your game. I just can't look forward enough to our next adventure in history about these cars.
Thank you very much, Larry.
Thank you for all your time. For the viewers, George, where'd this word trunk come from? And I see something very interesting on the back of this car.
Well, here is an original Packard trunk. Packard offered their accessory trunks to go on the trunk rack. Now, these cars came through with just a rack for your luggage, but they offered an accessory trunk. And this one actually even has a bumper, a trunk bumper, which is very unusual. That was an accessory that was offered by dealers. But just as you think about the name of your modern car has a trunk, well, here's the original trunk right here. And they were called trunks at the time. Where would you store your belongings or your groceries? Everything would go in the trunk, just like a modern car.
Wow, that's kind of interesting. I have never ever heard that, explained to me in that fashion. And this bumper, I mean, I had no idea that even existed.
That is a rare accessory. If you could go to many car shows and not see the accessory trunk bumper on a lot of the cars. So that came through. When this car was delivered new in early 1932, it was a leftover 31 model. They probably put every accessory that they could. The dealer tried to doll it up to grab a customer's attention, and that is another unusual accessory that was put on this car.
Well, very good. You got it first here at our adventure in history. Boy, I will say this 1932 Packard, really special. Dual cowl, fading again, and boy, let me tell you, the colors of this car were just beautiful, and look at the interior of the car. I mean, everywhere you look, just spotless and like in the day. And even that got caught my eye was this absolute beautiful hood ornament, or like the hood ornament's really on top of the radiator. Just beautiful. This car was special. Always special to be with George. As we come to the conclusion of the show, we have one more look at that 1931 Chrysler, and boy, let me tell you, this car was another car that really opened my eyes. Just can't believe how great of a car they built in the day and how pretty they are. No wonder they're so sought after by every collector you could imagine. This dual cowl Phaeton, I mean, I will tell you, I would just love to park this car right in my garage. But let me tell you, you'd have to get an armed guard, because this car got to be worth some crazy money. But absolutely gorgeous, and always great to come and see George and talk about the history of these cars. Just phenomenal what went on in the day. Yeah, another little trunk there. Unbelievable. Just special.
This program is brought to you in part by SalCal Real Estate Connections.
Please give us feedback on tonight's show. What do you think about having a weekly show in the future with George Dragon regarding the history of the automobile? Please email us at raceaction@aol.com. Please return next week to our next episode of Racing Action Today.